Welcome to this collection of 4 short stories by Mack Reynolds. I'll be narrating Tourist to Terra, A Zloor for Your Trouble, Unborn Tomorrow, and Potential Enemy. If you find yourself enjoying these stories by Mack Reynolds, be sure to head over to my Substack where I have more from him, including the novelette Subversive and a couple of other short stories. There are hundreds of stories here on my YouTube and Substack, so make sure to subscribe in both places so you don't miss any. But for now, let's get to the stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Tourists to Terra by Mack Reynolds. Narrated by William Skye. They came from a far sun in a distant time, seeking thrills on alien planets. Earth was their latest stop, and its puny humans promised good sport. Diomed of Argos, son of Tydeus, drew his sword with a shout and rushed forward to finish off his Trojan opponent before help could arrive. Suddenly he stopped and threw up a shielding arm before his eyes. When he could see again, one who could only have been Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, stood between him and the unconscious enemy. She was dressed as though for the bridal room, her goddess body breathtakingly beautiful, revealed through the transparent robe she wore. She was attired for love, but held a short sword in her hand. Aphrodite smiled at him in derision. "Now then, Prince of Argos, would you fight the gods?" She advanced the sword half-mockingly. But the Greek was mad with bloodlust, half-crazed with his day's victories. He snatched up his spear, muttering, "Pallas Athene aids me," and rushed her. Her eyes widened, fear flashing in them, and she began to rise from the ground. The barbaric spear flashed out and ripped her arm. Blood flowed, and she dropped the sword, screaming. Diomed heard a voice call urgently, Go back immediately to—" and the goddess Aphrodite disappeared. He whirled to face the newcomer and saw another god confronting him. The extent of his action was beginning to be realized, but Diomed had gone too far to turn back now. He charged his new opponent, shield held high and sword at the ready. The god lifted his hand, sending forth a bolt of power that brought the Greek to his knees. Diomed's eyes were filled with sudden fear and despair. "Phoebus Apollo," he quavered. The god was scornful. "Beware, Diomed," he said. "Do not think to fight with gods." The Greek cowered before him. Later, in the invisible spaceship hovering 500 feet above the battle, Cajun faced her, his features impassive and his tone of voice faultless. He was boiling with rage beneath his courtesy. "I will present your complaint to the captain, but I would like to remind the Lady Jan that she has been warned repeatedly against appearing in the battle clothed as she is and without greater defences. It was fortunate I was able to appear as soon as I did. If you'd been injured seriously, I hesitate to say what repercussions would have taken place on the home planet." Her eyebrows went up. "Injured seriously? Just what do you mean by that? Do you realize this horrible wound will probably take half the night to heal? You saw that barbarian was insane. Why didn't you come to my assistance sooner? You haven't heard the last of this, you inefficient nincompoop. When we return home, I'll have you stripped of your rank." Cajun's face remained blank. "Yes, your ladyship," he said. "And before I go, may I deliver a message from the lady married? She said they await you in the salon." She drew a cape about her and, without speaking further, swept from the compartment. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Parasites!" he muttered savagely, and turned to go to his own quarters where he could change from this ridiculous glittering armour into his own uniform as ship's officer. The Lady Jan stormed into the salon where the others had gathered to try the new concoction the steward had named Ambrosia. Some of them still wore their costumes, others had changed into the more comfortable dress of their own world. Her eyes blazed at them. Who in the name of Macred told that Greek he would conquer anyone he fought today, even a god? The damned barbarian nearly killed me. The Lord Darren laughed gently. It was married. She was playing the goddess Athene. The sport was rather poor with that new bow of hers, so she thought she'd inflame one of the Greeks and see just how berserk he would become if he thought he had the protection of a goddess. He could have killed me. Oh, come now, Jan, you were barely scratched. Besides, Marid didn't know this Greek Diomed was going to run into you, or that he'd have the fantastic nerve to attack whom he thought one of his gods. She took up a goblet of the new drink, but she wasn't placated. I'm of the opinion this stop shouldn't be made. It's too dangerous. I'm going to insist Captain Foreign blast the city and obliterate both sides of this barbaric conflict. The lady married, who was still dressed in her Pallas Athene armour, broke in. Don't be so upset, Jan. We're sorry that brute hurt your arm, but what can you expect on this type of cruise? They guaranteed us thrills, didn't they? The very dangers we face are what we're paying so highly for. She laughed lightly. Besides, that costume you wear as Aphrodite. Really? I don't know why you didn't get worse than a scratch on the arm. These Greeks aren't exactly civilized, nor exactly cold-blooded either. The other's face went red and she snatched another of the drinks from a tray. Nevertheless, I'm going to complain. This war is absolutely too perilous to be part of the tour, and after all the trouble we went to in order to learn their fantastic languages and customs, why, I was under that damned psycho-study impressor for nearly 2 hours. Captain Foreign had entered behind her. I agree with you, Lady Jan, and can only apologize. I should have realized last week when Lord General Barris, fighting in the battle as the god Ares on the Trojan side, was speared by this same Greek. The company would never hear the end of it if on one of these cruises a passenger was seriously injured. The Lord General Barris shrugged. It was wonderful sport. I killed a score of the beggars that day. I don't know how that one found a chink in my armor. I'll take measures against my costumer when we return home. He grinned wryly. I doubt if the Emperor would appreciate having one of his generals killed in a primitive war while on leave. I think I'll have to take a crack at this Diomed myself, Lord Doran said. The lady married laughed. If I know you, you will do it with a blaster from 100 feet in the air above him. Doran smiled in return. Of course. Do you think I'd make a fool of myself by going down into their battle as Barris does? It's insane. This hand-to-hand conflict is much too risky. The captain changed the subject. I'm sure you'll all appreciate our next stop, he said. I plan to visit an even more astounding planet than this. We are to fight the swamp dragons of Venus. From what distance, Captain? Lord Doran drawled. The captain smiled. Their poisonous breath reaches 1/2 mile, so it will be necessary to use long-distance weapons. Lord General Barris scowled. It sounds too easy. I like to fight humanoids. There's more thrill in killing when your opponent looks like yourself as to these earthlings. The Lady Jan was nearing the nasty stage of intoxication. It wouldn't be so thrilling if you weren't provided with defences making it practically impossible to be heard. You wouldn't enter these battles if you weren't sure you'd come out safely. I wouldn't deny it. Sport is sport, but I have no desire to be killed at it. At any rate, I'm opposed to killing these swamp dragons. It sounds as though it would be boring, and Macred knows. We had enough boredom butchering those dwarfs at our last stop. The lady married backed him. She also thought Venus unattractive. If the captain was of the opinion this war was too dangerous, wasn't there some other conflict on this planet? The captain told them he'd consult with his officers and let them know in the morning. One thing was sure, Captain Foreign thought as he made his way toward the officers' mess. He'd have to get this group of thrill-crazy wastrels away from Troy. If one of them was hurt badly, he'd undoubtedly lose his lucrative position on the swank cruise ship. The idea was his own, really, and a good one. In a luxury-mad world, the cry was for new titillations, new pleasures, new planets on which to play, new drugs to bring even wilder dreams, new foods, new drinks, new loves, but most of all, new thrills. Yes, the idea of taking cruise ships of wealthy thrill-seekers to the more backward planets and letting them join in primitive wars had been his. It proved the thrill supreme. His cruises were the rage of half a dozen planets, and the company had increased his pay several times in the past few years. But he knew it could crumple like a house of cards given one serious injury to a wealthy guest. The theory of the cruise was to let them kill without endangering themselves. The stop at Troy had, as a rule, been a successful one. The Greeks and their opponents were both highly superstitious and readily accepted the presence of the aliens from space as gods taking place in the battle. Usually they were too terrified to take measures against the strangers in their gleaming armor, but today had been the second occasion in which a tourist had been injured, in spite of scientific protective armor. His officers were awaiting him in the mess hall. They too had been conscious of the wounds suffered by the thrill-seeking guests, and hadn't liked it. Lady Jan was the daughter of a noble strong enough to have them all imprisoned if the whim took him. Captain Foreign growled. "Have any of you an idea? I proposed the Venus trip, but although they admit being leery about further risks here, they prefer fighting humanoids." First Officer Cajun said, "Perhaps it would be better to head for the home planet, Captain." Captain Foreign shook his head. "We can't do that. The cruise has another week to go. If we went back now, it would be obvious that something had happened and just bring matters to a head. If we can give them another week of thrills, possibly they'll have forgotten their wounds by the time we return." The chief engineer turned to Cajun. "At what stage of development is this planet?" "I believe it's at HA. Why?" "I was wondering at the possibility of going forward a few thousand years in time and participating in a war that dealt less in hand-to-hand conflict. They could have their fill of killing with a minimum of danger, protected, of course, with suitable anti-projectile force fields." Cajun went over to the ship's predict informer and spoke into its mouthpiece. "What will be the military development of this planet in 2,000 or 3,000 years, and would it be safe to take the ship into that period?" They awaited the answer, which came approximately 1 minute later. "Probability shows the inhabitants of Terra will begin utilizing explosives for propelling missiles in 2,000 years. About 500 years later, they will have developed this means of warfare to its ultimate. Safety for the ship is indicated." Captain Foreign mused. "That sounds practical. We could participate in some war in which our passengers could use such weapons as snipers from a distance." Another thought struck him. Besides, the Lord General Barris is quite intrigued with the possibilities involved in fighting the humanoids here. He had spoken of transporting large numbers of his troops to Terra and using the planet for a training ground in actual combat. Undoubtedly, the Earthlings of the future would make better victims for his soldiers than these more primitive types. It might be well to look at the future of this planet. The first engineer said, "Such a step would wipe out the development of civilization on the planet." Captain Foreign shrugged impatiently. He ordered Cajun to make immediate preparations to take the ship forward 2,500 years, and gave instructions to a sub-officer to locate a suitable conflict as soon as they arrived, so that the guests could begin their participation when they awoke in the morning. The ship arrived effortlessly in its new location in time, but when the sub-officer returned from his patrol, First Officer Cajun took him to the captain's quarters himself. He saluted. "I don't believe this is quite it, Captain." "Why not? Weren't there any wars in progress?" Cajun said. "It wasn't that. There were several. They don't seem to have reached the development for which we were looking. For instance, in the region in which we've landed, the first stage of a conflict between two nations have begun. The countries are called Mexico and the United States, and they're fighting over the northwestern possessions of the former, although, as always, both sides claim they are involved for idealistic reasons. However, the fighting still consists, to an extent, of hand-to-hand conflict. The soldiers carry explosive-propelled missile weapons, but they're usually slow in loading and single-shot in operation. Swords are carried at the ends of these weapons so that after it is fired, the soldier may dash forward and engage his enemy personally. The captain was glum. That's as bad as before, and I can't risk our passengers in any more hand-to-hand combat. Sir, these humanoids on Terra seem slow in progressing, but I have an idea if we move forward another 100 years, they will be using automatic weapons, and hand-to-hand combat will be antiquated. The calendar system they use calls this the year 1845. I suggest we travel forward to 1945. Captain Foran made a snap decision. All right, we'll go forward a century. As soon as we arrive, have a patrol go out again. When Captain Foran awoke in the morning, the hot desert sun was already well into the sky. The invisible spaceship had stationed itself 100 feet off the ground in an area in which there were no signs of habitation and few of the works of man. He strode leisurely to the control room and returned to the greetings of the morning watch. Any word from the patrol as yet? He asked. First Officer Cajun was worried. No, sir, and he should have been back long before this. I trust nothing has happened to him. Has he reported at all? Only once, several hours ago. Evidently there is a globe-wide war raging. Cajun ran his tongue over thin lips. Our passengers should have excellent sport. In fact, Captain, if you can spare me, I would like to participate myself. Captain Foran looked at him and laughed. You also? I'm afraid this must be a racial characteristic, this love of imposing death. I must confess, on my first trips I too liked to join in the sport. He turned and glanced out an observation port. What is that steel tower down there on the desert? We couldn't decide, Captain, unless it's some structure for conducting tests of some sort or other. The surprising thing about it is that our instruments detect radioactivity. The captain interrupted sharply. Has anyone checked the ship's predict informer on whether or not this error is completely safe? Cajun said. I assumed that you had, sir. He stepped to the instrument and spoke into its mouthpiece. What is the military development of this planet? Is the ship safe? The predict informer began its report. In the past 35 years, military science on Terra has developed tremendously under the impetus of 2 worldwide conflicts. At present, the dominant power on this continent is experimenting with nuclear fission. Sudden fear came into the eyes of the captain of the thrill ship. That radioactive steel tower! Blast off! He shrieked. Blast off! The predict informer went on dispassionately. And is about to test an atomic bomb against which this ship's defences would be? It got no further. Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds. Narrated by William Skye. Prescott stood to make a young fortune if he could capture a Martian Zloor, dead or alive. Was there a catch to it? Only for the hunter. I was sitting on the cot in the little room at the rear of my hangarage, where I keep my equipment and most of my trophies, and cleaning my 257 Roberts when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, decisive knock. Then the door opened, and I saw Wesley Marks for the first time. It didn't excite me. He said, Mr. Napoleon Prescott? I began to say, everybody calls me Nap, but then I didn't. There was something about this guy that didn't click with me. Say what you will against snap judgments, I still take my love at first sight and enmity often the same way. For one thing, he gave me the impression of looking for trouble. He was about 6'2", and he had what he obviously thought was an aristocratic face. His nose was the type that used to be called Roman, and looked like it'd be a honey to punch. He was dressed like a million, which didn't particularly impress me either. I'm on the rugged side myself, red-headed and homely to boot. He took in the rifle I was cleaning, and his eyebrows went up questioningly. "Collector?" he asked. Somehow or other he managed to put over the impression that he thought I didn't have the intellect to have a hobby. "Not exactly," I told him. "This is a tool, not a collector's item." There was almost a laugh in his voice now. "You mean you use that relic in your work?" I put the gun down, told myself to take it easy, then said, "They've made a lot of developments in weapons since this rifle was popular, but it still has advantages on certain types of jobs. For instance, if I was after a Kodiak bear up in the Alaska National Park," he snorted, "I'd take a bazooka rifle and be sure who came out on top." "Sure you would," I told him, "and there wouldn't be enough bear left to feed your dogs. I usually work for a zoo or a museum. They either want the animal alive or in good mounting condition. I admit that they've got guns now that one man can carry that'd sink one of the old-time battleships. Okay, but in my line I seldom need one." He didn't like my tone of voice, but he dropped the point and began looking around for a place to sit. I hadn't asked him to sit down, and I didn't now. I said, "Was there something I could do for you?" "I wanted to hire you for a rather lengthy period," he told me. "I'm all booked up for the next 6 months." "This is something rather special." "It always is when somebody wants you to cancel a job with a regular client." He didn't like me any better than I liked him, that was obvious. He said, "This comes under the heading of work for the government." I told him, "There are other professional hunters, some of them nearly as good as I am." The last was sarcastic. "Possibly better," he said, "but none of them are your size." I could feel my face approaching the colour of my hair at that one. "Keep my size out of it," I snapped. I indicated with a thumb a little statuette on my desk. "The guy my mother named me after was pint-sized too. He got along all right." He looked over at Bonaparte. He said. "Napoleon was a big name once, but he's only a bust now." "Listen," I told him, "you're asking for a bust yourself. Why don't you run along? I'm busy." He ignored me, found a chair that had nothing but a few magazines on it, tossed them to the floor, and sat down. "Your name was brought up because you're the smallest professional hunter on Earth. It'd save a few thousand credits in getting you to Mars and back." That stopped me. "What in Kurt are you talking about?" I growled. "The government wants a specimen, at least one, of a Zloor." "A what?" "A Zloor," he repeated. "A small Martian animal." I scowled at him. "And just why does the government want a Zloor?" "That's a secret." "Okay, I'll tell you another secret. Somebody else can catch the government as Zloor. I've never been off Earth, and I haven't any particular hankering to go now." I picked up the 257 Roberts again and reached for my oil can. He got to his feet, something just this side of a sneer on his face, and said, "I doubt if you could have got one anyway." I said easily, "If anyone else could catch it, I could." He reached for the doorknob. "I'd lay 1,000 credits against that," he said. He began to leave. "Wait a minute, buddy," I snapped. "Are you just sounding off, or have you got 1,000 credits you don't care what happens to?" He turned and faced me. "I am willing to wager 1,000 credits that you can't capture a Zloor." "How big are they?" "About the size of a rabbit." I glowered at him. "They very fast, or very poisonous, or what?" He shrugged. "They can't run quite as fast as a common Terran hare, and I understand they're quite gentle." "Then why haven't they been captured?" "Among other things, Napoleon," he rolled my name over his tongue as though he got a big laugh from it, "there have been only a few hundred persons in all that have gone to Mars. Few of them, to my knowledge, have been interested in the life forms there. The expense of freight in space is much too high for Terran zoos to transport Martian life forms, particularly alive, considering the cost of duplicating in the spacecraft the living conditions necessary to—" "All right," I snapped. "Just a minute." I picked up the Visophone and dialed rapidly. In seconds, Jerry Mason's friendly pan lit up the screen. "Listen, Jerry," I said. "Have you ever heard of a Martian's law?" His eyebrows went up. "Sure, what? Are they particularly fast?" "No, of course not, but are they dangerous?" He grinned, but he was still puzzled. "I'd say they were about the least dangerous animal I ever heard of. But Nap, just one more question, Jerry. I'm in a hurry. Do you think I could catch one?" "I can't think of anything you could catch easier." He started to give one of his short bursts of laughter. "But thanks, Jerry," I told him. "See you later." I snapped off the set and turned back to Wesley Marks. "All right, answer just one question and I'll take up that bet of yours. What's secret about this?" "If I tell you, you'll take on the job?" "The job and the 1,000-credit bet," I grated. "Very well. It is suspected that the Zloor is an alien life form." I stared at him. "Are you around the corner?" I demanded. "Of course it's an alien life form. Didn't you just say it's a Martian animal?" But some authorities think it is alien to this solar system. At least they suspect so. That's why the government wants a specimen to dissect and thoroughly investigate. They haven't the facilities on Mars, of course, so it will be necessary to bring one back here." I still stared at him. "Alien to the solar system? Your roof must be leaking. How would it get here?" A sudden suspicion hit me. "You mean it's intelligent? I thought there wasn't any intelligent life forms on Mars." He shook his head. "It's a stupid herbivorous animal." He shot a glance down at his watch. "The shuttle for the space station leaves in 3 hours. Can you make it?" I glared at him. "You give me plenty of time, don't you? I'll make it all right. But first I want this bet down in writing." "Of course," he said smoothly. I had to hustle plenty. The Zloor wasn't any bigger than a rabbit, and I knew that life forms on Mars were in general small, so I took nothing larger than my little carbine-sized .22 Hornet, another gun that Wesley Marks probably would have sneered at, but which I wouldn't have traded for all the automatics you could shake a stick at. I didn't take much else. No clothes except the shorts I wore when I climbed into the shuttle rocket for the space station. When Marks said freight rates in space were high, he just wasn't whistling, Terra forever. I could buy clothes and any other equipment I needed a good deal cheaper on Mars than the cost of transporting them there would come to. For one thing, when anybody left the colony planet to come back to Terra, they invariably left behind everything in the way of clothing and personal equipment. For another, a certain amount of these things were being manufactured on Mars from native raw materials in an attempt to escape the murderous space rates. After the 4G's acceleration had cut off and we were in free fall, I took the opportunity to read the contract I'd hurriedly signed with Wesley Marks. On thorough reading, the contract didn't seem too bad. All my expenses to and from Mars were paid by Marks. I also got 5 credits a month in the way of salary. No fortune, but average pay for a Terran worker. If I caught a Zloor and brought it back alive, I got a 500 credit bonus. If I brought 2 back alive, a 700 credit bonus. If I brought a dead one back, I got a 300 bonus. Wesley Marks didn't seem to be interested in getting more than 1 dead one, since there wasn't any provision for a larger number. He'd given me to understand that this job was for the government, but from the way the contract read, I was working for the Marks Enterprises. That irritated me for a minute or so, but I finally shrugged it off. He probably had a government contract to secure one of the things. I still couldn't figure out what his angle was, but I knew there must be one. Too much money was involved to make this a routine assignment such as I usually work on for the zoos. Evidently, Marks ran some sort of an expediting outfit which took on off-trail contracts. At this point, I might do a little in the way of describing my trip to the space station which circles Terra and is used as a takeoff point to Luna and the planets. I might go on and tell of my journey from there to the space station in orbit about Mars, and then further still of my shuttling down to Fort Mars, and my first impressions of landing there, of the 1/6 gravity, the thin air, the plastic dome which covers the whole little city. But the trouble is that 100 people a lot quicker with a dicto typer than I am have already done the job. I'll just leave that part of it and take up with my first contact with my fellow Terrans on Mars. One of the old gags is to the effect that when Greek meets Greek, they start a restaurant. Okay, maybe, but I do know this, that when man in general starts up a new colony, one of the first buildings he puts up is a bar. At any rate, as soon as I was settled at the Builtless Hotel, the name of course is a gag, but the place lived up to it, I made my way to Sam's. Now, there's something that invariably happens to people who get around. It's happened to you, if you're one of us. Maybe you're walking through the Congo Game Preserve, figuring there isn't another man, white or otherwise, within 100 kilometers. Suddenly you run into another party, and somebody yells, "Hello, Nap! What in Kurt are you doing here?" The last time you saw him was in San Francisco. Or maybe you're doing some solitary drinking in some obscure bar in Guatemala. The guy next to you looks over and says, "Say, aren't you Nap Prescott, the brother of—" And of course you are. Well, that was it. I hadn't any more got up to the bar and told Sam, "Let me have some of this Martian woji I've been hearing so much about," when I heard somebody yelp, "It's Nap! I'll be a grinning macron if it isn't Nap!" I turned around and there was Mike Holliday, as big as life and twice as drunk. He waddled his bulk over to me, Mike always waddles when he's soused, from the table where he'd been sitting. "By the holy jumping Wodo," he crowed. "I'll bet my left arm you came to get a Zloor." I'd been grinning and holding out my hand to clasp his, but that stiffened me. He saw it and began to laugh uproariously. "Another joiner of the club," he yelped. "Come on over and meet your fellow members. You got one of them Wesley contracts too?" That did it. I went over and met the boys. Mike Holliday wasn't the only acquaintance of mine in Fort Mars. In fact, it was like a convention of the outstanding professional hunters of Earth. They all shouted their greetings, some of them laughing so hard tears rolled down their cheeks. Evidently, they got a big kick every time a newcomer was added to their ranks. I shook hands with some, but most were too hilarious to go through the ceremony. Blackie Conover yelled, "I'll bet anybody 2-1 he brought a 22 Hornet to shoot himself as Zloor. 2-1. "Do we look like suckers?" Mike yelled back at him. I sank into a chair and took it for a while. "I can wait," I growled at them. "Sooner or later somebody'll get round to telling me what goes on." "He can wait, he says," Doughbelly fairly yelped in delight. "Brother, he ain't just a whistling terror forever. He can wait. Bring on the woji. Start the initiation." I woke up in the morning in Mike Holliday's apartment. I groaned and told myself that I was sworn off of woji for all time. I didn't know then that Terra-side liquor sold for 10 credits a bottle. Mike was grinning down at me. "You'll get used to woji," he said. "I should live so long," I moaned. Then I sat up suddenly in the bed. "You guys wouldn't tell me anything last night," I said. He was still grinning. "That's part of the initiation into the Zloor Club. What do you want to know, Nap?" I swung my feet over the side of the bed and came to a sitting position. I groaned and shook my head in an attempt to clear it. "What are half the professional hunters I know doing on Mars?" He spun a chair around so that the back faced me and straddled it, his arms resting on the top rung. "Same thing you are, Nap. Being suckers for that macron Wesley Marks." I started to say something there, but he interrupted me with a wave of a hand. "This is what it boils down to. Marks has a contract with some branch of the government to bring back one or more Zloors. And don't ask me why he doesn't go out and catch one himself. He's tried." "He has, eh?" "Yeah, he has. Had a whole crew up here. What makes it nice for him is that he's on a cost-plus basis. If he never succeeds, it'll still be money in his pocket. If he does, he gets a whopping big bonus. Every time he sends another man up here to take a crack at getting a Zloor, he makes money. No doubt the way he told you the story, you'd think you were the only one trying." I snorted. "He told me I'd been picked because I was the smallest pro hunter in the game." Mike Holliday grinned. "He picked me because I was so big. I could stand the rigours of life on Mars," he said. "Well, if it's a racket, why doesn't everybody go home on the next ship?" "Probably for the same reason you won't. That sharper made me so sore I bet him 500 credits I could catch a Zloor." "I bet him 1,000, I groaned. Mike whistled. "Where'd you ever get 1,000 credits, Nap?" "I broke into my piggy bank," I growled. "It's every cent I had in the world." "Well, we're all in the same boat. He made bets with all the boys. If we go back, we lose. As long as we stay here, we make 5 credits a month, plus expenses. And besides, all of us are just conceited enough to think we can figure out eventually how to get one of the things home." "Now we're getting to the point," I told him. "What's so hard about catching a Zloor?" He began to grin again. "Nothing," he said, "and that's all I'll tell you now. Go out and find the gruesome details yourself." I went over to the wash basin and filled the bowl and dipped my head into the water. I didn't say anything else to him until I'd dried myself and climbed into my clothes. "All right," I said then. "Where do I go to see about getting equipment and men for an expedition to the Zloor country?" He laughed. "All you need in the way of equipment is your feet, that is, besides a plastic oxygen mask when you leave the dome." He pointed out the window. "Just head for the nearest rocky area. There's lots of it. You won't have any trouble finding a Zloor. In fact, they're numerous. No natural enemies." I scowled at him. "What keeps them down, then?" "Insufficient forage, I guess. You'll see." I picked up my .22 Hornet rifle and started for the door. "No time like the present to," I began to say. Mike was still grinning in the irritating manner he'd been displaying ever since the night before. "You won't need that gun," he told me. "I'll just take it along anyway," I snapped. After leaving the dome through one of the airlocks, I headed out onto the surface of Mars, weighted down with my leaded boots, standard equipment for cutting down some of the effect of the 1/6 gravity of the planet. Over to the westward, possibly 3 miles away, seemed to be a barren, rocky area. I knew that Mike Holliday wouldn't have deliberately lied to me. That was where Zloors were to be found. I made my way in that direction. "About the size of a rabbit," I muttered, "and half the hunters on Earth can't bring one back." I made the rocky area and found myself a suitable prominence from which to look around. In less than 15 minutes I'd spotted one of the things. They were about the size of a rabbit, all right, and what was more, they looked considerably like one of the Earth-type rodents. Long ears, knob of a tail. I watched it for some time through the small glass I'd borrowed from Mike. It was evidently eating the bark, and possibly the wood as well, of a stunted, rugged-looking Martian tree which seemed to be growing out of almost solid rock. The boys had said that there were a lot of Zloors around, so I didn't have to worry about conversion. I took up the rifle, aimed carefully through the scope, and squeezed the trigger. I was interested eventually in getting a live Zloor, but it wouldn't hurt to have a closer look at one of the things to help me in planning my campaign. The gun snapped, and I could see the tiny bullet spank into the little animal's side. I'd got him. But something didn't look right. I took up the telescope again and peered through it. The Zloor was still eating. That stopped me. I could have sworn that I'd hit it, right amidships. I aimed even more carefully this time, for its head, and squeezed gently. That shot too hit dead center, but the Zloor didn't bother to stop its feeding. I sat there a long time staring at it. Finally, I snorted inwardly. Obviously, this was what had been stopping the others. This animal had some very effective natural body armor. Well, there is more than one way of skinning a Zloor, as well as a cat. I picked up the rifle and headed down toward the tree and the animal that was devouring it, figuring to get as close as possible with the idea of getting a really good look at the bulletproof beastie. I wished now that I'd brought my .257 Roberts instead of the .22 Hornet. At first I was careful in my approach, slipping from cover to cover, but as I got closer, it became evident that the Zloor wasn't particularly timid, and that as far as it was concerned, I could come as near as I wanted. I stood off about 5 feet and watched it for a long time. Once it looked up and over at me, but then went back to the tree in which it was making a respectable hole. I tried once again with the rifle, aiming carefully right behind its ear. The gun snapped and the bullet thudded, but the Zloor ignored it. "Holy wodo," I snorted. "He's really bulletproof." In fact, he was more than just bulletproof. The shock of the impact of the high-powered 22 hadn't even bothered him. It wasn't just a matter of the bullet's inability to penetrate the hide. Well, I told myself, let's see just how close I can come before it runs off. I walked up to him cautiously. He didn't move. In my surprise, I even prodded him gently with my shoe. He still didn't move. He looked up at me again, his eyes a wistful yellowish colour, then went back to his meal. I shook my head, wondering if I was still suffering from the effects of the Woji binge or what. This was just too easy. Maybe it was a sick one or something. I reached down and grasped it by the ears and started to pick it up. Have you ever tried to pick up something and found out it either weighed considerably more or was fastened to the floor? That's what happened to me. With Martian gravity, what it is, I figured I'd have a weight of possibly 1 Earth pound of lift. Instead, I nearly broke my back, and the Zloor still didn't budge. I put more pressure to bear, all my strength, and the Zloor complacently went on eating. Hands on hips, I stood above the rabbit-like animal and stared at it. Finally, I muttered, "More than one way to bring home a Zloor," and, taking my gun by the barrel, I swung it viciously down at the gentle-looking little animal, feeling like a heel as I did it. I might have saved my feelings, because 2 seconds later, I was gazing wide-eyed at the shattered stock of my rifle, and the Zloor was still eating away at the tree. I tried just one more experiment before I called it a day. I put the rifle barrel under him and tried to pry him off the ground. The Zloor still ignored me, but the steel barrel bent under the pressure. The animal hadn't budged. Without knocking, I walked back into Mike Holliday's room. He was lying stretched out on the bed, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to look at me. He said, "Nap, you are now a full-fledged member of the Zloor Club." "What does one of those things weigh?" I snapped. "Hey, redhead," he grunted. "Don't take it out on me. I didn't invent them. Far as I know, nobody's ever weighed one, but it's been estimated that they go about 5 tons here on Mars. 6 times that on Earth." "That's insane." "Sure is. That's why the government wants one so badly. Just isn't natural for such an animal to develop in the solar system. Or anywhere else." He got up on one elbow and grinned over at me. "The theory is that it's a life form from some planet belonging to a white dwarf star. Some time ago, a guy named Adams at the Mount Wilson Observatory, back on Earth, estimated that the density of some of the white dwarfs was 2,000 times greater than platinum. I'm not much up on it myself." I scowled down at him. "How'd it get here?" He was serious now. "That's the reason the government wants one so badly, Nap. They want to get it to their laboratories and find out everything they can. There only seems to be one possibility, though." "What's that?" "If it is alien to the solar system and from a white dwarf's planet, it might have been brought here deliberately and left as a guinea pig." I began to say something there, but he held up a hand to stop me. Possibly an exploring spaceship from the alien planet was looking for colony sites. When it got to our solar system, it left some of these animals with the idea of coming back in a few thousand years or so to see if the Zloors were able to adapt themselves to the conditions existing here. I ran my tongue over suddenly dry lips. "You mean that if the Zloors can live in our solar system, then these more intelligent aliens would figure they could use our sun system for a colonizing project?" He nodded. "Holy Wodo," I said. "No wonder they want some specimens to work on back on Earth." He relaxed again. "Well, at the rate we're going, it'll be a long time before Earth laboratories ever have the opportunity to mess around with our pal the Zloor." I got a chair and sat down facing him and said seriously, "Mike, brief me on what you and the other fellows have tried." "You don't have to ask. That goes with membership in the club," he grinned. "Among other things, we've tried building a steel box around one of them with the idea of putting wheels on it later." "That sounds good." "Uh-huh. The trouble was that when the Zloor felt like moving, he walked right through the side of the steel box like you or I'd walk through a wall of tissue paper." "How about poisoning one?" I rapped. "You could get a dead one back a lot easier than—" "They don't poison," he said. "And from what we can figure, they're practically immortal. We have never found a dead one. What do you mean they don't poison? Just that. Nap, the animal can eat anything organic and thrive on it. Evidently, no poison that nature has ever produced affects it. At least none of us have been able to dream one up. How about narcotics? Something to dope it? He shook his head. To begin with, some of these Martian plants produce narcotic effects that make the products of our poppy look like food for babes, but the Zloor takes them in its stride. It's really got a cast iron stomach. We've never been able to locate anything it won't eat and enjoy eating. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, a bazooka rifle would kill one. Sure, he said, and splatter it all round the scenery at the same time. The laboratories need a good specimen. There was another long silence. Finally, I said, Why in the name of Wodo don't they sink into the ground if they weigh as much as all that? They would, only they make a point of walking on rock. That must be another one of the things that limits their spreading even more widely. They have to be able to forage on ground that supports very little vegetation. You could lift one with a derrick, he said. This is the 5th time I've been through this. Every guy that Wesley Marks sends up here asks the same questions. Sure, you could lift it with a derrick if the derrick was big enough. Do you have any idea of what it'd cost to bring a derrick of that size to Mars? And that's not the only thing either. These Zloors are gentle as lambs, but they hate to be confined against their will. That derrick would have to have some awfully strong equipment to keep the Zloor from breaking loose and ambling off. There's other angles there too. Suppose your derrick did lift him into the shuttle. When you got the shuttle up to the space station, how'd you move the Zloor from the shuttle to the station, and then from the station to the rocket for Terra? He got up from the bed and went over to a little table to return with a bottle and a couple of glasses. He poured 2 drinks and handed me one. Here, he said. You look like you could use a quick one. Have a hair of a dog that's going to bite Kurt out of you before you ever leave Mars. I grated. I could stand the rest of it, but what burns me up is that Macron Wesley Marks. Here he is getting rich on the project. Besides what he makes from the government, he's bet every one of us so much that we'll all be out our life savings when we go back. Brother Knapp, you have said it, Mike Holliday said feelingly. He tilted the glass to his lips and drank deeply. I was right behind him. It was more than 2 years later when I walked into the office of Wesley Marks. I noted with pleasure that he still looked as aristocratic as ever. Ah, he said, Mr. Napoleon Prescott. As I recall, the last time we met you objected to my calling your namesake a bust. Don't tell me that we have an additional bust in... I loved it. I loved every word of it. And he must have seen that I did. What are you grinning about? He barked. It was the first time I had seen his poise disturbed. Frankie, I told him, is at the spaceport right now. Johnny will be down on the next shuttle. As you can imagine, the shuttle was pretty well strained to capacity to bring even one at a time. It was no trouble in space, of course, since they were weightless in freefall, but entering the gravitational, he put his hands on the top of the desk and half came to his feet. His eyes were wide. Who are Frankie and Johnny? I feigned surprise. Frankie and Johnny are sweethearts, a couple of Zloors in this case. Remember, you sent me for them. I thought a male and a female would be best. He slumped back in his chair. You aren't lying? I didn't say anything. How did you do it? With peach pits, I said. Peach pits? Peach pits. They like apricot pits too, and sometimes prune seeds. What in the world are you talking about, Prescott? Have you lost your mind? I opened the humidor on his desk, took out a cigar, smelled it, bit off the end, lit it, and took a deep puff before answering him. I settled down into a comfortable chair and pointed the lighted end of the cigar in his direction. Between one or the other of us, we had tried everything. I realized finally that it would have to be an entirely different approach. I took another satisfying drag on the cigar, then went on. I tried lettuce, cabbage, corn, string beans, everything in fact that the hydroponic tanks on Mars could supply in the way of Earth-type food. None of it worked. "What in hell are you talking about?" Marks blurted. I ignored him. Finally it came to me. Lettuce and the other vegetables I offered would be too light for them. I tried walnut hulls and then peach pits, and that worked like a charm. "You must be insane." "You don't seem to understand, Marks," I told him. "There was no other way of getting a Zloor on board an Earthbound rocket, so I made pets of a couple of them. They love peach pits, regular delicacy for them." I added reflectively. "You'd be surprised how well trained I've got Frankie and Johnny. I'll hate to give them up." I tapped the ash of the cigar off on his heavy carpet and said, "However, business is business. Let's see, by our contract you owe me 5 credits for each month I've been gone, plus a 700 credit bonus for bringing back 2 live Zloors. Then there's that 1,000 credit wager we made." He snapped on his inter-office communicator and growled instructions to his secretary to find whether or not I had brought back 2 live Zloors in the Mars rocket. We sat there silently while she checked. I puffed on the cigar with appreciation and dropped the ashes pointedly on the floor. He was irritated but wouldn't give me the satisfaction of complaining. I knew I was being childish, but I loved it. The inter-office communicator buzzed and he listened to his secretary's report, then reached down into his desk for a checkbook. He said, while he was writing it, "I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, Prescott, that in spite of this sum I'm giving you, I'll still make a considerable profit on this deal." I took the check and examined it carefully. I told him, "but I wouldn't be very surprised if a good deal of that profit is going to be melting away." "Eh? What do you mean?" he snapped. I told him. "The other boys up on Mars are still well equipped with peach pits. They're all making pets too. The next few rockets from Mars are going to be loaded with Zloors, Wesley, old man. You're going to have a flock of bets to pay off, and besides that, I'm wondering if the government is going to want that many Zloors. As I understand it, 2 is all that they contracted for with you. Of course, you'll have to pay the boys for them." He didn't say anything as I left, fanning the check to dry it, but he looked as though he'd met his Waterloo. If you're enjoying the stories, make sure to hit the like button to help the channel out. Thanks. Unborn Tomorrow by Mack Reynolds. Narrated by William Skye. Unfortunately, there was only one thing he could bring back from the wonderful future, and though he didn't want to, nevertheless he did. Betty looked up from her magazine. She said mildly, "You're late." "Don't yell at me. I feel awful," Simon told her. He sat down at his desk, passed his tongue over his teeth in distaste, groaned, fumbled in a drawer for the aspirin bottle. He looked over at Betty and said, almost as though reciting, "What I need is a vacation." "What," Betty said, "are you going to use for money?" "Providence," Simon told her whilst fiddling with the aspirin bottle, "will provide." But before providing vacations, it'd be nice if Providence turned up a missing jewel deal, say. Something where you could deduce that actually the ruby ring had gone down the drain and was caught in the elbow. Something that would net about $50. Simon said, mournful of tone, $50? Why not make it 500? "I'm not selfish," Betty said. "All I want is enough to pay me this week's salary." "Money," Simon said. "When you took this job, you said it was the romance that appealed to you." I didn't know most sleuthing amounted to snooping around department stores to check on the clerks knocking down," Simon said enigmatically. "Now it comes." There was a knock. Betty bounced up with Olympic agility and had the door swinging wide before the knocking was quite completed. He was old, little, and had bug eyes behind pince-nez glasses. His suit was cut in the style of yesteryear, but when a suit costs $200 or $300, you still retain caste, whatever the styling. Simon said unenthusiastically. "Good morning, Mr. Oyster." He indicated the client's chair. "Sit down, sir." The client fussed himself with Betty's assistance into the seat. Bug-eyed Simon said finally, "You know my name. That's pretty good. Never saw you before in my life. Stop fussing with me, young lady. Your ad in the phone book says you'll investigate anything." "Anything," Simon said. "Only one exception." "Excellent. Do you believe in time travel?" Simon said nothing. Across the room where she had resumed her seat, Betty cleared her throat. When Simon continued to say nothing, she ventured, "Time travel is impossible." "Why?" "Why?" "Yes, why?" Betty looked to her boss for assistance. None was forthcoming. There ought to be some very quick, positive, definite answer. She said, "Well, for one thing, paradox. Suppose you had a time machine and travelled back 100 years or so and killed your own great-grandfather. Then how could you ever be born?" "Confound it if I know," the little fellow growled. "How?" Simon said, "Let's get to the point. What you wanted to see me about?" "I want to hire you to hunt me up some time travellers," the old boy said. Betty was too far in now to maintain her proper role of silent secretary. "Time travellers," she said, not very intelligently. The potential client sat more erect, obviously with intent to hold the floor for a time. He removed the pince-nez glasses and pointed them at Betty. He said, "Have you read much science fiction, miss?" "Some," Betty admitted. "Then you'll realize that there are a dozen explanations of the paradoxes of time travel. Every writer in the field worth his salt has explained them away. But to get on, it's my contention that within a century or so, man will have solved the problems of immortality and eternal youth, and it's also my suspicion that he will eventually be able to travel in time. So convinced am I of these possibilities that I am willing to gamble a portion of my fortune to investigate the presence in our era of such time travellers." Simon seemed incapable of carrying the ball this morning, so Betty said, "But, Mr. Oyster, if the future has developed time travel, why don't we ever meet such travellers?" Simon put in a word. "The usual explanation, Betty, is that they can't afford to allow the space-time continuum track to be altered. If, say, a time traveller returned to a period of 25 years ago and shot Hitler, then all subsequent history would be changed. In that case, the time traveller himself might never be born. They have to tread mighty carefully." Mr. Oyster was pleased. "I didn't expect you to be so well informed on the subject, young man." Simon shrugged and fumbled again with the aspirin bottle. Mr. Oyster went on. "I've been considering the matter for some time and—" Simon held up a hand. "There's no use prolonging this. As I understand it, you're an elderly gentleman with a considerable fortune, and you realize that thus far nobody has succeeded in taking it with him." Mr. Oyster returned his glasses to their perch, bug-eyed Simon, but then nodded. Simon said, "You want to hire me to find a time traveller and in some manner or other, any manner will do, extort from him the secret of eternal life and youth, which you figure the future will have discovered. You're willing to pony up a part of this fortune of yours if I can deliver a bona fide time traveller." "Right." Betty had been looking from one to the other. Now she said plaintively, "But where are you going to find one of these characters, especially if they're interested in keeping hid?" The old boy was the centre again. "I told you I'd been considering it for some time. The Oktoberfest, that's where they'd be." He seemed elated. Betty and Simon waited. "The Oktoberfest," he repeated. "The greatest festival the world has ever seen. The carnival, feria, fiesta to beat them all. Every year it's held in Munich. Makes the New Orleans Mardi Gras look like a quilting party." He began to swing into the spirit of his description. It originally started in celebration of the wedding of some local prince a century and a half ago, and the Bavarians had such a bang-up time they've been holding it every year since. The Munich breweries do up a special beer, Marzenbrau they call it, and each brewery opens a tremendous tent on the fairgrounds which will hold 5,000 customers apiece. Millions of litres of beer are put away, hundreds of thousands of barbecued chickens, a small herd of oxen are roasted whole over spits, millions of pair of Weisswurst, a very special sausage, millions upon millions of pretzels. All right, Simon said. We'll accept it. The Oktoberfest is one whale of a wingding. Well, the old boy pursued, into his subject now, that's where they'd be, places like the Oktoberfest. For one thing, a time traveller wouldn't be conspicuous. At a festival like this, somebody with a strange accent, or who didn't know exactly how to wear his clothes correctly, or was off the ordinary in any of a dozen other ways, wouldn't be noticed. You could be a four-armed space traveller from Mars and you still wouldn't be conspicuous at the Oktoberfest. People would figure they had DTs. But why would a time traveller want to go to a... Betty began. Why not? What better opportunity to study a people than when they are in their cups? If you could go back a few thousand years, the things you would wish to see would be a Roman triumph, perhaps the rites of Dionysus, or one of Alexander's orgies. You wouldn't want to wander up and down the streets of, say, Athens while nothing was going on, particularly when you might be revealed as a suspicious character, not being able to speak the language, not knowing how to wear the clothes, and not familiar with the city's layout. He took a deep breath. No, ma'am, you'd have to stick to some great event, both for the sake of actual interest and for protection against being unmasked. The old boy wound it up. Well, that's the story. What are your rates? The Oktoberfest starts on Friday and continues for 16 days. You can take the plane to Munich, spend a week there and... Simon was shaking his head. Not interested. As soon as Betty had got her jaw back into place, she glared unbelievingly at him. Mr. Oyster was taken aback himself. See here, young man, I realize this isn't an ordinary assignment. However, as I said, I am willing to risk a considerable portion of my fortune. Sorry, Simon said. Can't be done. $100 a day plus expenses, Mr. Oyster said quietly. I like the fact that you already seem to have some interest and knowledge of the matter. I liked the way you knew my name when I walked in the door. My picture doesn't appear often in the papers. No go, Simon said, a sad quality in his voice. A $50,000 bonus if you bring me a time traveller. Out of the question, Simon said. But why? Betty wailed. Just for laughs, Simon told the two of them sourly. Suppose I tell you a funny story. It goes like this. I got $1,000 from Mr. Oyster, Simon began, in the way of an advance, and leaving him with Betty, who was making out a receipt, I hustled back to the apartment and packed a bag. Hell, I'd wanted a vacation anyway. This was a natural. On the way to Idlewild, I stopped off at the Germany information offices for some tourist literature. It takes roughly 3.5 hours to get to Gander from Idlewild. I spent the time planning the fun I was going to have. It takes roughly 7.5 hours from Gander to Shannon, and I spent that time dreaming up material I could put into my reports to Mr. Oyster. I was going to have to give him some kind of report for his money. Time travel yet. What a laugh! Between Shannon and Munich, a faint suspicion began to simmer in my mind. These statistics I read on the Oktoberfest in the Munich tourist pamphlets. 5 million people attended annually. Where did 5 million people come from to attend an overgrown festival in comparatively remote southern Germany? The tourist season is over before September 21st, first day of the gigantic beer bust. Nor could the Germans account for any such number. Munich itself has a population of less than 1 million, counting children. And those millions of gallons of beer, the hundreds of thousands of chickens, the herds of oxen. Who ponied up all the money for such expenditures? How could the average German with his $25 a week salary? In Munich, there was no hotel space available. I went to the Bahnhof where they have a hotel service and applied. They put my name down, pocketed the husky bribe, showed me where I could check my bag, told me they'd do what they could, and to report back in a few hours. I had another suspicious twinge. If 5 million people attended this beer bout, how were they accommodated? The Theresienwiese, the fairground, was only a few blocks away. I was stiff from the plane ride, so I walked. There are 7 major brewers in the Munich area, each of them represented by one of the circus-like tents that Mr. Oyster mentioned. Each tent contained benches and tables for about 5,000 persons, and from 6 to 10,000 pack themselves in, competing for room. In the centre is a tremendous bandstand, the musicians all lederhosen clad, the music as Bavarian as any to be found in a Bavarian beer hall. Hundreds of peasant-garbed Frauleins darted about the tables with quart-sized earthenware mugs, platters of chicken, sausage, kraut, and pretzels. I found a place finally at a table which had space for 20-odd beer bibbers. Odd is right. As weird an assortment of Germans and foreign tourists as could have been dreamed up, ranging from a 70 or 80-year-old couple in Bavarian costume to the bald-headed drunk across the table from me. A desperate waitress bearing 6 mugs of beer in each hand scurried past. They call them masses, by the way, not mugs. The bald-headed character and I both held up a finger, and she slid 2 of the masses over to us and then hustled on. "Down the hatch," the other said, holding up his mass in toast. "To the ladies," I told him. Before sipping, I said, "You know, the tourist pamphlets say this stuff is 18%. That's nonsense. No beer is that strong." I took a long pull. He looked at me, waiting. I came up. "Mistaken," I admitted. A mass or 2 apiece later, he looked carefully at the name engraved on his earthenware mug. "Löwenbräu," he said. He took a small notebook from his pocket and a pencil, noted down the word, and returned the things. "That's a very queer-looking pencil you have there," I told him. "German?" "Venusian," he said. "Oops, sorry, shouldn't have said that." I had never heard of the brand, so I skipped it. "Next is the Hofbrau," he said. "Next what?" Baldy's conversation didn't seem to hang together very well. "My pilgrimage," he told me. "All my life I've been wanting to go back to an Oktoberfest and sample every one of the 7 brands of the best beer the world has ever known. I'm only as far as Löwenbräu. I'm afraid I'll never make it." I finished my mass. "I'll help you," I told him. "Very noble endeavour. Name is Simon." "Arth," he said. "How could you help?" "I'm still fresh, comparatively. I'll navigate you around. There are 7 beer tents. How many have you got through so far?" "2, counting this one," Arth said. I looked at him. "It's going to be a chore," I said. "You've already got a nice edge on." Outside, as we made our way to the next tent, the fair looked like every big state fair ever seen, except it was bigger. Games, souvenir stands, sausage stands, rides, sideshows, and people. The Hofbrau tent was as overflowing as the last, but we managed to find 2 seats. The band was blaring, and 5,000 half-swacked voices were roaring accompaniment. "In München steht ein Hofbrauhaus. 1, 2, Gesufa." At the Gesufa, everybody upped with the mugs and drank each other's health. "This is what I call a real beer bust," I said approvingly. Arth was waving to a waitress. As in the Löwenbräu tent, a full quart was the smallest amount obtainable. A beer later, I said, "I don't know if you'll make it or not, Arth." "Make what?" "All 7 tents." "Oh." A waitress was on her way by, mugs foaming over their rims. I gestured to her for refills. "Where are you from, Arth?" I asked him in the way of making conversation. 2183. 2183 where? He looked at me, closing one eye to focus better. Oh, he said. Well, 2183 South Street, New Albuquerque. New Albuquerque? Where's that? Arth thought about it. Took another long pull at the beer. Right across the way from Old Albuquerque, he said finally. Maybe we ought to be getting on to the Pschorbrau tent. Maybe we ought to eat something first, I said. I'm beginning to feel this. We could get some of that barbecued ox. Arth closed his eyes in pain. Vegetarian, he said. Couldn't possibly eat meat. Barbarous. Ugh. Well, we need some nourishment, I said. There's supposed to be considerable nourishment in beer. That made sense. I yelled, Fraulein, 2 neue Bier. Somewhere along in here the fog rolled in. When it rolled out again, I found myself closing one eye the better to read the lettering on my earthenware mug. It read Augustinerbrau. Somehow we'd evidently navigated from one tent to another. Arth was saying, Where's your hotel? That seemed like a good question. I thought about it for a while. Finally I said, Haven't got one. Town's jam-packed. Left my bag at the Bahnhof. I don't think we'll ever make it, Arth. How many we got to go? Lost track, Arth said. You can come home with me. We drank to that and the fog rolled in again. When the fog rolled out, it was daylight. Bright, glaring, awful daylight. I was sprawled, complete with clothes, on one of twin beds. On the other bed, also completely clothed, was Arth. That sun was too much. I stumbled up from the bed, staggered to the window and fumbled around for a blind or curtain. There was none. Behind me a voice said in horror, Who? How? Oh, Wodo, where'd you come from? I got a quick impression, looking out the window, that the Germans were certainly the most modern, futuristic people in the world. But I couldn't stand the light. Where's the shade? I moaned. Arth did something and the window went opaque. That's quite a gadget, I groaned. If I didn't feel so lousy, I'd appreciate it. Arth was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding his bald head in his hands. I remember now, he sorrowed. You didn't have a hotel. What a stupidity. I'll be phased all the way down. You haven't got a handful of aspirin, have you? I asked him. Just a minute, Arth said, staggering erect and heading for what undoubtedly was a bathroom. Stay where you are. Don't move. Don't touch anything. All right, I told him plaintively. I'm clean. I won't mess up the place. All I've got is a hangover, not lice. Arth was gone. He came back in 2 or 3 minutes, box of pills in hand. Here, take one of these. I took the pill, followed it with a glass of water, and went out like a light. Arth was shaking my hand. Want another mass? The band was blaring and 5,000 half-swacked voices were roaring accompaniment. In München steht ein Hofbrauhaus. 1, 2, Gesuffer. At the Gesuffer, everybody upped with their king-sized mugs and drank each other's health. My head was killing me. This is where I came in, or something, I groaned. Arth said, That was last night. He looked at me over the rim of his beer mug. Something somewhere was wrong, but I didn't care. I finished my mass and then remembered. I've got to get my bag. Oh, my head. Where did we spend last night? Arth said, and his voice sounded cautious, At my hotel, don't you remember? Not very well, I admitted. I feel lousy. I must have dimmed out. I've got to go to the Bahnhof and get my luggage. Arth didn't put up an argument on that. We said goodbye and I could feel him watching after me as I pushed through the tables on the way out. At the Bahnhof they could do me no good. There were no hotel rooms available in Munich. The head was getting worse by the minute. The fact that they'd somehow managed to lose my bag didn't help. I worked on that project for at least a couple of hours. Not only wasn't the bag at the luggage checking station, but the attendant there evidently couldn't make heads nor tails of the check receipt. He didn't speak English, and my high school German was inadequate, especially accompanied by a block-busting hangover. I didn't get anywhere by tearing my hair and complaining from one end of the Bahnhof to the other. I drew a blank on the bag, and the head was getting worse by the minute. I was bleeding to death through the eyes, and instead of butterflies, I had bats in my stomach. Believe me, nobody should drink a gallon or more of Marzenbrau. I decided the hell with it. I took a cab to the airport, presented my return ticket, told them I wanted to leave on the first obtainable plane to New York. I'd spent 2 days at the Oktoberfest, and I'd had it. I got more guff there. Something was wrong with the ticket, wrong date or some such. But they fixed that up. I never was clear on what was fouled up, some clerk's error evidently. The trip back was as uninteresting as the one over. As the hangover began to wear off a little, I was almost sorry I hadn't been able to stay. If I'd only been able to get a room, I would have stayed, I told myself. From Idlewild, I came directly to the office rather than going to my apartment. I figured I might as well check in with Betty. I opened the door, and there I found Mr. Oyster sitting in the chair he had been occupying 4, or was it 5 days before when I'd left. I'd lost track of the time. I said to him, "Glad you're here, sir. I can report. What was it you came for? Impatient to hear if I'd had any results?" My mind was spinning like a whirling dervish in a revolving door. I'd spent a wad of his money and had nothing I could think of to show for it, nothing but the last stages of a granddaddy hangover. "Came for?" Mr. Oyster snorted. "I'm merely waiting for your girl to make out my receipt. I thought you had already left." "You'll miss your plane," Betty said. There was suddenly a double dip of ice cream in my stomach. I walked over to my desk and looked down at the calendar. Mr. Oyster was saying something to the effect that if I didn't leave today, it would have to be tomorrow, that he hadn't ponied up that $1,000 advance for anything less than immediate service. Stuffing his receipt in his wallet, he fussed his way out the door. I said to Betty hopefully, "I suppose you haven't changed this calendar since I left?" Betty said, "What's the matter with you? You look funny. How did your clothes get so mussed? You tore the top sheet off that calendar yourself not half an hour ago, just before this marble missing client came in." She added irrelevantly, "Time travellers yet." I tried just once more. When did you first see this Mr. Oyster?" "Never saw him before in my life," she said. "Not until he came in this morning." "This morning?" I said weakly, while Betty stared at me as though it was me that needed candling by a head shrinker preparatory to being sent off to a pressure cooker. I fished in my pocket for my wallet, counted the contents, and winced at the pathetic remains of the 1,000. I said pleadingly, "Betty, listen. How long ago did I go out that door on the way to the airport?" "You've been acting sick all morning. You went out that door about 10 minutes ago, were gone about 3 minutes, and then came back." "See here," Mr. Oyster said, interrupting Simon's story. "Did you say this was supposed to be amusing, young man? I don't find it so. In fact, I believe I am being ridiculed." Simon shrugged, put one hand to his forehead, and said, "That's only the first chapter. There are 2 more. "I'm not interested in more," Mr. Oyster said. "I suppose your point was to show me how ridiculous the whole idea actually is. Very well, you've done it. Confound it. However, I suppose your time, even when spent in this manner, has some value. Here is $50, and good day, sir." He slammed the door after him as he left. Simon winced at the noise, took the aspirin bottle from its drawer, took 2, washed them down with water from the desk carafe. Betty looked at him admiringly, came to her feet, crossed over, and took up the $50. "Week's wages," she said. "I suppose that's one way of taking care of a crackpot. But I'm surprised you didn't take his money and enjoy that vacation you've been yearning about." "I did," Simon groaned. 3 times. Betty stared at him. "You mean—" Simon nodded miserably. She said, "But Simon, $50,000 bonus. If that story was true, you should have gone back again to Munich. If there was one time traveler, they might have been—" "I keep telling you," Simon said bitterly. "I went back there 3 times. There were hundreds of them, probably thousands." He took a deep breath. "Listen, we're just going to have to forget about it. They're not going to stand for the space-time continuum track being altered. If something comes up that looks like it might result in the track being changed, they set you right back at the beginning and let things start, for you, all over again. They just can't allow anything to come back from the future and change the past." "You mean—" Betty was suddenly furious at him. "You've given up? Why, this is the biggest thing. Why, the $50,000 is nothing. The future. Just think." Simon said wearily, "There's just one thing you can bring back with you from the future. A hangover compounded of a gallon or so of Marzenbrau. What's more, you can pile one on top of the other, and another on top of that." He shuddered. "If you think I'm going to take another crack at this merry-go-round and pile a 4th hangover on the 3 I'm already nursing, all at once, you can think again." Remember to hit the like button to support the channel. Thanks. Potential Enemy by Mack Reynolds. Narrated by William Skye. Caesar had the same problem and never solved it. Lord help us if it just can't be done. It isn't travel that is broadening, stimulating, or educational. Not the travelling itself. Visiting new cities, new countries, new continents, or even new planets, yes. But the travel itself, no. Be it by the methods of the 20th century, automobile, bus, train, or aircraft, or be it by spaceship, travel is nothing more than boring. Oh, it's interesting enough for the first few hours, say. You look out the window of your car, bus, train, or airliner, or over the side of your ship, and it's very stimulating. But after that first period, it becomes boring, monotonous, sameness to the point of redundance. And so it is in space. Markham Gray, freelance journalist for more years than he would admit to, was en route from the Neptune satellite Triton to his home planet Earth, mistress of the solar system. He was seasoned enough as a space traveller to steel himself against the monotony with cards and books, with chess problems and wiretapes, and even with an attempt to do an article on the distant Earth base from which he was returning for the Space Traveller Digest. When all these failed, he sometimes spent a half-hour or so staring at the vision screen, which took up a considerable area of one wall of the lounge. Unless you had a vivid imagination of the type which had remained with Markham Gray down through the years, a few minutes at a time would have been enough. With rare exception, the view on the screen seemed almost like a still, a velvety blackness with pinpoints of brilliant light, unmoving, unchanging. But even Markham Gray, with his ability to dream and to discern that which is beyond, found himself twisting with ennui after 30 minutes of staring at endless space. He wished that there was a larger number of passengers aboard. The half-dozen businessmen and their women and children had left him cold, and he was doing his best to avoid them. Now, if there had only been one good chess player. Co-pilot Borman was passing through the lounge. He nodded to the distinguished elderly passenger, flicked his eyes quickly, professionally, over the vision screen, and was about to continue on his way. Gray called idly, "Hans! I thought the space patrols very seldom got out here." "Practically never, sir," the other told him politely, hesitating momentarily. Part of the job was to be constantly amiable, constantly watchful of the passengers out here in deep space. They came down with space cafard at the drop of a hat. Markham Gray reminded Borman of pictures of Benjamin Franklin he'd seen in history books, and ordinarily he didn't mind spending a little time now and then talking things over with him. But right now he was hoping the old duffer wasn't going to keep him from the game going on forward with Captain Post and the steward. "Just noticed one on the screen," the elderly journalist told him easily. The co-pilot smiled courteously. "You must have seen a meteorite, sir. There aren't any." Markham Gray flushed. "I'm not as complete a space neophyte as your condescending air would indicate, Lieutenant. As a matter of fact, I'll stack my space months against yours any day." Borman said soothingly, "It's not that, sir. You've just made a mistake. If a ship was within reasonable distance, the alarms would be sounding off right now. But that's not all either. We have a complete record of any traffic within a considerable distance, and I assure you that—" Markham Gray pointed a finger at the lower left-hand corner of the screen. "Then what is that, Lieutenant?" he asked sarcastically. The smile was still on the co-pilot's face as he turned and followed the direction of the other's finger. The smile faded. "I'll be a Macron," he blurted. Spinning on his heel, he hurried forward to the bridge, muttering as he went. The older man snorted with satisfaction. Actually, he shouldn't have been so snappy with the young man. He hated to admit he was growing cranky with age. He took up his half-completed manuscript again. He really should finish this article, though Space knew he hadn't enough material for more than a few paragraphs. Triton was a barren satellite if he'd ever seen one, and he had. He had almost forgotten the matter 10 minutes later when the ship's public address system blurted loudly, "Battle stations! Battle stations! All crew members to emergency stations! All passengers immediately to their quarters! Battle stations!" Battle stations? Markham Gray was vaguely familiar with the fact that every solar system spacecraft was theoretically a warcraft in emergency, but it was utterly fantastic that... He heaved himself to his feet, grunting with the effort, and, disregarding the repeated command that passengers proceed to their quarters, made his way forward to the bridge, ignoring the hysterical confusion in passengers and crew members hurrying up and down the ship's passageways. It was immediately obvious, there at the craft's heart, that this was no farce, at least not a deliberate one. Captain Roger Post, youthful officer in command of the Nueve Los Angeles, Lieutenant Hans Bormann, and the 2 crew members on watch were white-faced and shaken, momentarily confused in a situation which they had never expected to face. The 2 officers stood before the bridge vision screen watching, wide-eyed, that sector of space containing the other vessel. They had enlarged it 100-fold. At the elderly journalist's entrance, the skipper had shot a quick, irritated glance over his shoulder and had begun to snap something. He cut it off. Instead, he said, "When did you first sight the alien ship, Mr. Gray?" "Alien?" "Yes, alien. When did you first sight it? It is obviously following us in order to locate our home planet." There was extreme tension in the captain's voice. Markham Gray felt cold fingers trace their way up his back. Why, I must have noticed it several hours ago, Captain." "But an alien? He peered at the enlarged craft on the screen. "Are you sure, Captain? It seems remarkably like our own. I would say—" The captain had spun back around to stare at the screen again, as though to reassure himself of what he had already seen. "There are no other ships in the vicinity," he grated, almost as though to himself. "Besides that, as far as I know, and I should know, there are no Earthcraft that look exactly like that. There are striking similarities, I'll admit, to our St. Louis-class scouts, but those jets on the prow, there's nothing like them, either in existence or projected." His voice rose in an attempt to achieve decisiveness. "Lieutenant Bormann, prepare to attack!" Suddenly the telviz blared. "Calling the Nueve Los Angeles. Calling the Nueve Los Angeles. Be unafraid. We are not hostile." There was quiet on the bridge of the Earth ship. Screaming quiet. It was seemingly hours before they had recovered even to the point of staring at one another. Hans Bormann gasped finally, unbelievingly. "How could they possibly know the name of our ship? How could they possibly know the Ameringlish language?" The captain's face was white and frozen. He said so quietly that they could hardly make it out. "That's not all. Our alarms still haven't been touched off, and our estimators aren't functioning. We don't know how large they are, nor how far away. It's unheard of. Somehow they've completely disrupted our instruments." Markham Gray followed the matter with more than average interest after their arrival at New Albuquerque Spaceport. Not that average interest wasn't high. Finally, man had come in contact with another intelligence. He had been dreading it, fearing it for decades. Now it was here. Another life form had conquered space and seemingly had equipment, in some respects at least, superior to humanity's. The court-martial of Captain Roger Post had been short and merciless. Free access to the trial had been given to the press and television systems, and the newscasts had carried it in its entirety, partially to stress to the public mind the importance of the situation, and partially as a warning to other spacemen. Post had stood before the raised dais upon which were seated Subspace Comm Mitchell and 4 other high-ranking officers, and heard the charge read: failure to attack the alien craft, destroy it, and thus prevent the aliens, wherever they might be from, returning to their own world and reporting the presence of man in the galaxy. Markham Gray, like thousands of others, had sat on the edge of his chair in the living room of his small suburban home and followed the trial closely on his telviz. Subspace Comm Mitchell had been blunt and ruthless. He had rapped out, bitingly, "Roger Post, as captain of the Nueve Los Angeles, why did you not either destroy the alien craft, or, if you felt it too strong for your ship, why did you not blast off into space, luring it away from your home planet?" Post said hesitantly, "I didn't think it necessary, sir. His attitude was, well, of peace. It was as if we were 2 ships that had met by chance and dipped their flags in the old manner and passed on to their different destinations. They were even able to telviz us a message." The Subspace Comm snapped. "That was undoubtedly a case of telepathy. The alien is equipped in some manner to impose thoughts upon the human brain. You thought the telviz was used. Actually, the alien wasn't speaking Amer English. He was simply forcing thoughts into your minds." Markham Gray, watching and listening to this over his set, shook his head in dissatisfaction. As always, the military mind was dull and unreceptive. The ridiculousness of expecting Post to blast off into space in an attempt to fool the other craft in regard to his home planet was obvious. The whole affair had taken place within the solar system. Obviously the alien would know that one of Sol's 9 major planets was mankind's home. Finding out which one wouldn't be too difficult a job. Roger Post was saying hesitantly, "Then it is assumed that the alien craft wasn't friendly?" Subspace Comm Mitchell indicated his disgust with an impatient flick of his hand. "Any alien is a potential enemy, Post. That should be elementary. And a potential enemy is an enemy in fact. Even though these aliens might seem amiable enough today, how do we know they will be in the future, possibly in the far future? There can be no friendship with aliens. We can't afford to have neighbours. We can't afford to be encircled by enemies." "Nor even friends?" Captain Post had asked softly. Mitchell glared at his subordinate. "That is what it amounts to, Captain. And the thing to remember is that they feel the same way. They must. They must seek us out and destroy us completely and as quickly as possible. By the appearance of things, and partially through your negligence, they've probably won the first round. They know our location. We don't know theirs." The Supreme Commander of Earth Space Forces dropped that point. "Let us go back again. When you received this telepathic message, or whatever it was, what was your reaction? Did it seem friendly, domineering, or what?" Roger Post stood silent for a moment. Finally, he answered, "Sir, I still think it was the telviz rather than a telepathic communication. But the tone of voice seemed to give me the impression of pitying." "Pitying?" Mitchell ejaculated. The captain was nervous but determined. "Yes, sir. I had the distinct feeling that the being that sent the message felt sorry for us." The Subspace Comm's face had gone red with indignation. It was 3 years before another of the aliens was sighted. 3 hurried, crowded, harassed years, during which all the solar system's resources were devoted to building and arming a huge space fleet and rushing space defenses. The total wars of the 20th century paled in comparison to the all-out efforts made to prepare for this conflict. The second view of the alien ship was similar to the first. This time the Pendleton, a 4-man scout returning to the Venus base after a patrol in the direction of Sirius, held the intruder in its viewer for a full 5 minutes. Once again, no estimation of its distance nor size could be made. All instruments pertaining to such detection seemed to fail to function properly. And again the alien had sent a message, seemingly at least by Telviz. "We are no danger to you, mankind. Seek your destiny in peace. Your troubles are from within." The Pendleton would have attempted to follow the strange craft, but her fuel tanks were nearly dry and she had to proceed to Venus. Her captain's report made a sensation. In a way, the whole business had been a good thing for Markham Gray. As a freelancing journalist, he'd had a considerable advantage. First, he was more than usually informed on space travel and problems relating to it. Second, he had been present at, in fact had made himself, the first sighting of the aliens. His articles were in continuous demand in both magazines and newspaper supplements. Editors clamoured for additional material from his vocotyper. There was but one complaint against his copy. It wasn't alarmist enough, sensational enough. Humanity had been whipped into a state of hysteria, an emotional binge, and humanity loved it. And it was there that Markham Gray refused to go along. He had agreed with poor Captain Post, now serving a life sentence in the Martian prison camps. There had been no sign of hostility from the alien craft. It was man who was preparing for war, and Gray knew of no period in history in which preparations for war did not eventually culminate in one. So it was not really strange that it was he the aliens chose to contact. It came in the early hours of the morning. He awakened, not without a chill of fear, the sound of his Telviz set in his ears. He had left it turned off, he knew that. He shook his head to clear it, impatient of the fact that with advancing years it was taking an increasing time to become alert after sleep. He had not caught the message. For a brief moment he thought the sound had been a dream. Then the Telviz spoke again. The screen was blank. It said, "You are awake, Mr. Gray." He stared at it, uncomprehending. He said, I don't understand." Then, suddenly, he did understand, as though by an inspired revelation. Why they were able to speak Amer English. Why their ship looked like a Terran one. Why they had been able to disrupt the Earth ship's instruments. He said haltingly, "Why are you here?" "We are familiar with your articles. You alone, Mr. Gray, seem at least to seek understanding. Before we left, we felt it our duty to explain our presence and our purpose, that is, partially." "Yes," he said. Then, in an attempt to check the conclusion at which he had just arrived, he added, "You are going from the solar system, leaving your home for a new one." There was a long silence. Finally, "As we said, we were going to explain partially our presence and purpose, but obviously you know more than we had thought. Would you mind revealing the extent of your knowledge?" Gray reached to the foot of the bed and took up his nightrobe, partly because it was chilly, partly to give himself time to consider his answer. Perhaps he shouldn't have said that. He was alone in this small house. He had no knowledge of their intentions toward him. But he had gone too far now. He said, "Not at all. I am not sure of where we stand, but things should be much clearer shortly. First of all, your spaceships are tiny, probably less than 10 pounds. "About 4, Mr. Gray." "Which explains why our instruments did not record them. The instruments weren't disrupted. Your ships were really too small to register. That's where we made our first mistake. We assumed, for no valid reason, that you were approximately our own size. We were willing to picture you as non-human and possessing limbs, organs, and even senses different from ours, but we have pictured aliens, as we've been calling you, as approximately our own size. Actually, you must be quite tiny." "Quite tiny, Markham Gray, although of course the way we think of it is that you are quite huge." He was becoming more confident now. Widely awake, it was less strange to hear the words come from his commonplace home model Telviz set. "Our second mistake was in looking for you throughout space," he said softly. There was hesitation again, then, "And why was that a mistake, Markham Gray?" Gray wet his lips. He might be signing his death warrant, but he couldn't stop now. "Because you are not really aliens, but of Earth itself. Several facts point that way. For instance, your ships are minute models of Earth ships, or rather of human ships. You have obviously copied them. Then, too, you have been able to communicate with humans too easily. An alien to our world would have had much more trouble. Our ways, our methods of thinking, are not strange to you." "You have discovered a secret which has been kept for many centuries, Markham Gray." He was more at ease now. Somehow there was no threat in the attitude of the other. Gray said, "The hardest thing for me to understand is why it has been kept a secret. Obviously, you are a tiny form of Earth life, probably an insect, which has progressed intellectually as far beyond other insect forms as man beyond other mammals. Why have you kept this a secret from humans?" "You should be able to answer that yourself, Mr. Gray. As we developed, we were appalled by the only other form of life on our planet with a developed intelligence. Why, not even your own kind is safe from your bloodlust. The lesser animals on Earth have either been enslaved by man or slaughtered to extinction. And even your fellows in the recent past were butchered. Man killed man wholesale. Do you blame us for keeping our existence a secret? We knew that the day humans discovered there was another intelligence on Earth, they would begin making plans to dominate, or, even more likely, to destroy us. Our only chance was to find some refuge away from Earth. That is why we began to search the other stars for a planet similar to this and suitable to our form of life." "You could have fought back had we attempted to destroy you," Gray said uncomfortably. The next words were coldly contemptuous. "We are not wanton killers like man. We have no desire to destroy." Gray winced and changed the subject. "You have found your new planet?" "At last. We are about to begin transportation of our population to the new world. For the first time since our ancestors became aware of the awful presence of man on the Earth, we feel that we can look forward to security." Markham Gray remained quiet for a long time. "I am still amazed that you were able to develop so far without our knowledge," he said finally. There was an edge of amusement in the answering thought. "We are very tiny, Mr. Gray, and our greatest efforts have always been to keep from under man's eyes. We have profited greatly, however, by our suitability to espionage. Little goes on in the human world of which we don't know. Our progress was greatly aided by our being able to utilize the science that man has already developed. You've noticed, for instance, how similar our spaceships are to your own." Gray nodded to himself. "But I'm also impressed by the manner in which you have developed some mechanical device to duplicate human speech. That involved original research." "At any rate, neither man nor we need dread the future any longer. We have escaped the danger that overhung us, and you know now that we are no alien enemies from space threatening you. We wish you well, mankind. Perhaps the future will see changes in your nature. It is in this friendly hope that we have contacted humanity through you, Mr. Gray." The elderly journalist said quietly, "I appreciate your thoughtfulness and hope you are correct. Good luck to you in your new world." "Thank you, Markham Gray, and goodbye." The set was suddenly quiet again. Markham Gray stood before the assembled military council of the solar system. He had told his story without interruption to this most powerful body on Earth. They listened to him in silence. When he had finished, he waited for their questions. The first came from Subspacecom Mitchell. He said thoughtfully, "You believe their words to be substantially correct, Gray?" "I believe them to be entirely truthful, Your Excellency," the journalist told him sincerely. "Then they are on the verge of leaving the Earth and removing to this other planet in some other star system?" "That is their plan." The Subspacecom mused aloud. "We'll be able to locate them when they blast off en masse. Their single ships are so small that they missed being observed, but a mass flight we'll be able to detect. Our cruisers will be able to follow them all the way, blasting them as they go. If any get through to their new planet, we'll at least know where they are and can take our time destroying it." The president of the council added thoughtfully, "Quite correct, Mitchell. And in the early stages of the fight, we should be able to capture some of their ships intact. As soon as we find what kind of insect they are, our bacteriologists will be able to work on a method to eliminate any that might remain on Earth." Markham Gray's face had paled in horror. "But why?" he blurted. "Why not let them go in peace? All they've wanted for centuries is to escape us, to have a planet of their own." Subspacecom Mitchell eyed him tolerantly. "You seem to have been taken in, Mr. Gray. Once they've established themselves in their new world, we have no idea of how rapidly they might develop and how soon they might become a threat. Even though they may be peaceful today, they are potential enemies tomorrow. And a potential enemy is an enemy who must be destroyed." Gray felt sickness well through him. But this policy, What happens when man finally finds on his borders a life form more advanced than he, an intelligence strong enough to destroy rather than be destroyed? The tolerance was gone now. The subspace comm said coldly, "Don't be a pessimistic defeatist, Grey." He turned to the admirals and generals of his staff. "Make all preparations for the attack, gentlemen." Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the stories, hit the like button and subscribe for more here on YouTube and over on my Substack where I publish all of my narrations, some of which don't make it to YouTube. It's all ad-free in video, audio and podcast form over there, with free and paid tiers. Links in the description. See you there.